Good morning, and thank you for joining this online virtual service of the First Unitarian Church of Alton on this 31st day of January in 2021. It's hard to believe that we have already finished January and we are ready to move on full steam ahead through the rest of this calendar year. Holy cow. I am Robin Berkeley, and I am president of this congregation, and I also serve as a worship associate. The First Unitarian Church is a small lay-led congregation located in Alton, Illinois. Due to the pandemic, our services are now virtual, and past and present services can be located on our church YouTube page. We hope to see you at our Castle on the Hill sometime soon when we can return to worship together face to face. In the meantime, we welcome everyone to this virtual home of comfort, spirit, justice, and hope. We are Unitarian Universalists. Today, after we saw a new president and vice president inaugurated a week or so ago, I want to reflect on the beautiful poem read by the youth poet laureate Amanda Gorman. It inspired me to consider how that poem exemplifies UU values. As well, our founding fathers, many of whom were Unitarians themselves, built this country on those same values. In today's service, I will talk about those founding fathers and Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, and how they inspire us today to continue the work of the church, how they influence us to achieve our mission to inspire love and seek justice. I hope you enjoy today's service. We begin our worship with a prelude by our accompanist, Joy Heft. If you have a candle nearby, please join me as I light my own and recite our unison words for the chalice lighting. We hallow this time together by kindling the lamp of our heritage. Our opening prayer today is actually a poem written by Amanda Gorman, and a different one than the one that we have heard about previously. I thought I'd awaken to a world in mourning, heavy clouds crowding, a society storming, but there's something different on this golden morning, something magical in the sunlight, wide and warming. I see a dad with a stroller taking a jog. Across the street, a bright-eyed girl chases her dog. A grandma on a porch fingers her rosaries. She grins as her young neighbors bring her groceries. While we might feel small, separate, and all alone, our people have never been more closely tethered. The question isn't if we will weather this unknown, but how we will weather this unknown together. So on this beautiful morn, we mourn and we mend. Like light, we can't be broken even when we bend. As one, we will defeat both despair and disease. We stand with healthcare heroes and all employees, with families, libraries, schools, waiters, artists, businesses, restaurants, and hospitals hit hardest. We ignite not in the light, but in lack thereof, for it is in loss that we truly learn to love. In this chaos, we will discover clarity. In suffering, we must find solidarity. For it's our grief that gives us our gratitude, shows us how to find hope if we ever lose it. We ensure that this ache wasn't endured in vain. Do not ignore the pain, give it purpose, use it. Read children's books, dance alone to DJ music. Know that this distance will make our hearts grow fonder. From a wave of woes, our world will emerge stronger. We'll observe how the burdens braved by humankind are also the moments that make us humans kind. Let every dawn find us courageous, brought closer, heeding the light before the fight is over. When this ends, we'll smile sweetly, finally seeing in testing times we became the best of things. As we dive into today's messages a bit, I want to bring your attention to the UU principles that I believe are relevant to today's discussion. While all could be relevant, the main ones are number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Number 6, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And number 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Amanda Gorman's message of the journey we have taken and will continue to take to reach our goals of unity, love, and peace as a country and as a people align beautifully with our UU values. And we'll discuss these principles a bit more during our message time. And now for stewardship. We offer this gentle reminder that this community of faith is supported only by your giving. We need each other, and in times of trial, we need each other even more. You can mail your gift to First Unitarian Church, P.O. Box 494, Alton, Illinois 62002, or you can give electronically by searching for First Unitarian Church of Alton on the Givelify app on your phones or via the link on our webpage. As well, you can give through PayPal if you prefer. Give what you will, for you are a generous people. If you know it, please join me with our offering prayer. May this offering equip us to inspire love and to seek justice. Our reading today is another poem from Amanda Gorman, The Hill We Climb. And this is what she shared with us on Inauguration Day. And really, this is the poem that inspired me to think about how to frame all of this information in the context of our UU values. It's a beautiful poem, and if you have not had a chance to see her recite it, please do go onto YouTube and you can Google it very easily. I will never be able to approach the beauty with which she delivered this because it came from her heart and her soul. But I will do my best to share that message and to communicate what I believe is the beautiful message that we see in that poem. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in the never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. And the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country in a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president only to find herself reciting for one. Yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our futures first, we must first put our differences aside. We all lay down our arms so that we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to this, to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. This effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith, we trust. For while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the golden hills of the West. We will rise from the wind-swept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover. In every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country, our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If we're only brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. So, for our message today, I want to talk a little bit about our founding fathers, about Unitarianism and its role in the values of our country, as well as sort of deconstructing how that all relates to that beautiful poem that Amanda Gorman delivered at the inauguration, so much in alignment with what the values of the United States are about, were founded on, as well as the alignment with UU values, how important it is. I mean, and you've just heard me reread that poem, as I said, albeit not with the same beautiful cadence and delivery that she did, but nonetheless, the words are really powerful. They speak for themselves. If you haven't had a chance to listen or to read, as I said, please do. Please read them. Please listen to them. I was really struck as I was listening to her um, about how so many of those nuances of how she sees the United States, the nuances in that were all really linked to the founding of our country and what we believe, certainly as Unitarians, what the intentions were of our founding fathers and how important it is for us to truly recognize that our founding fathers were flawed human beings. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But, despite the fact that they were flawed human beings, their desire to create a more perfect union. And again, I'm going to come back to this point in a few minutes too. To create this more perfect union was really based on this idea of freedom of expression, freedom of religion, freedom of the goals of who we are and the practices that we want to engage in, allowing people the freedom to be who they are meant to be no matter what. And this sort of is where so much of this comes into play when we think about some of the battles that we fight here in modern times, where there's an anti-LGBT sentiment, there's an anti-female sentiment, there's an anti-immigrant and otherness sentiment that pervades, or certainly pervaded, the last few years in the Trump presidency. And again, I'm not here to talk about politics per se, but more what these things sort of mean for us as we think about what UU values are and why we need to continue to fight the good fight, to continue to be the role models, to be the change we wish to see in the world in that manner. So, um, I think this is where I want to head with this, and I want to bring you along on that journey with me, because I'm exploring and thinking about these things for myself. As we try to make some fundamental changes in this country to bring us to a place of unity, togetherness, peace, love. Can we do this? One of the things that I myself too have struggled with is this notion that people say, this is not who we are. And I've heard myself say it too. And then I realized as I was saying this, that in fact, the things that we're experiencing now are in fact a huge part of our history. Think about the legacy of slavery, the legacy of what we did as a country to indigenous peoples, to what we did is we entered wars that were not ours to fight in Vietnam and other places. Yeah, I mean, it isn't who we wanted to be, but in fact, these negative issues are a big part of the history that we've had. And the good news is, we have the mindfulness and the mindset and the desire and the ability to overcome this history. We can look to the future, as Amanda Gorman says in her poem, and not look about, what was past or what's between us, but what can we do together to move us forward. And I do think that, we can play an important role in this as Unitarians. And the UU values, the Unitarian values of our founding fathers, and how important those are. So with that, I also want to sort of make reference or pay homage, if you will, to a sermon that I did a few years ago. I was asked to speak around July 4th about to deliver a sermon to the congregation. And so I decided to talk about this notion of patriotism versus nationalism, and how our UU founding fathers certainly had an influence on this. I think, if you recall, I talked about Edward Everett Hale and a few other elements as part of that. And I think it is really important that we recognize that our flawed founding fathers. Many of them had the best of intentions, the best of goals, but they fell short even of their own desires and their own aspirations. And Thomas Jefferson certainly comes to mind, right? Thomas Jefferson is, while known to be someone who fought hard for and was the author of the Declaration of Independence, fought hard for rights for all of us to separate from England, the United Kingdom. But as a flawed man, as a Unitarian even, still kept slaves, had raped a young woman and kept her as his mistress, if you will, which is basically, she didn't have a choice in that matter, and we're going to call it what it was. He raped her, and he kept her as he owned her. And this is someone who espoused important values and yet still tripped and fell and fell apart and made mistakes. And this is a history that we really are truly starting to grapple with. This is hard stuff for us to absorb, but I think it is really important that we use the language of what things are and not clean them up and make them pretty and package them, right? Because that's what U.S. history or any history really does all the time. It's like, to make it palatable for the masses, we pretty it up and we say, and then the great man did this, and well, we know that's not really what history is about. That history is ugly, and it's 2 steps forward and 5 steps backwards, and then a couple of slides to the left and right, and a lot of fighting and a lot of anger and a lot of destruction and a lot of evil that enters into this. If we want to use the terminology from religious terms, this idea of what is considered to be evil. But nonetheless, I found that sermon that I created at that time was very interesting. And for me to learn more about how our founding fathers influenced the values of this country, I think is really important. I'm going to start, part of this now by reading this article that I pulled up from the LA Times in 1995. And it leads us into the rest of our discussion because it tries to address the sort of the religious leanings, if you will, of our founding fathers and the important role that Unitarianism played in the interests and the values of our founding fathers. So this is from 1995, the LA Times, and it reads as follows. The Christian right is trying to rewrite the history of the United States as part of its campaign to force its view of religion on others who ask merely to be left alone. According to this Orwellian revision, the founding fathers were devout Christians who envisioned a Christian nation. Not true. The early presidents and patriots were generally deists or Unitarians, believing in some form of impersonal providence, but rejecting the divinity of Jesus and the relevance of the Bible. And the article goes on to highlight a number of those individuals, and we're going to start with Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, pamphleteer whose manifestos encouraged the faltering spirits of the country and aided materially in winning the War of Independence, stated, I do not believe in the creed professed by the Jewish Church, by the Roman Church, by the Greek Church, by the Turkish Church, by the Protestant Church, nor by any church that I know of. Each of these churches accuses the other of unbelief, and for my own part, I disbelieve them all. Makes sense. George Washington, our first president, states, he seems to have, not states, but this is a clip about him. He seems to have had the characteristic unconcern of the 18th century deists for the forms and creeds of institutional religion. Although he often referred to providence as an impersonal force, remote and abstract, he never declared himself to be a Christian, either in contemporary records or his voluminous correspondence. Washington championed the cause of freedom from religious intolerance and compulsion. When John Murray, a Universalist who denied the existence of hell, was invited to become an army chaplain, other chaplains petitioned Washington to reject him. Instead, Washington gave him the appointment. On his deathbed, Washington uttered no words of a religious nature and did not call for a clergyman to be in attendance. The next founder that I want to talk about is John Adams, who is known to be a Unitarian, went to Unitarian churches up in the Boston area. He was our second president. Drawn to the study of law by facing pressure from his father to become a clergyman, he wrote that he found among lawyers a noble air and gallant achievements, but among the clergy, the pretended sanctity of some absolute dunces. Late in life, he wrote, 20 times in the course of my late reading have I been put upon the point of breaking out. This would be the best of all possible worlds if there were no religion in it. It was during Adams' presidency that the Senate ratified the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which stated in Article 11 that the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. This treaty with the Islamic State of Tripoli had been written and concluded by Joel Barlow during Washington's administration. The next patriot, or the next founder, is Thomas Jefferson, the third president and the author of the Declaration of Independence. He stated, I trust that there is not a young man now living in the United States who will not die a Unitarian. Jefferson referred to the book of Revelation as the ravings of a maniac, and in further criticism of the Bible, he wrote, "The Christian priesthood, finding the doctrines of Christ leveled to every understanding and too plain to need explanation, saw in the mysticisms of Plato materials with which they might build up an artificial system which might, from its indistinctness, admit everlasting controversy, give employment for their order, and introduce it to profit, power, and preeminence. The doctrines which flowed from the lips of Jesus himself are within the comprehension of a child, but thousands of volumes have not yet explained the Platonisms engrafted on them, and for this obvious reason, that nonsense can never be explained." James Madison, the fourth president and the father of the Constitution, states, "Religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind and unfits it for every noble enterprise," he wrote. "During almost 15 centuries has the legal establishment of Christianity been on trial. What have been its fruits? More or less in all places, pride and indolence in the clergy, ignorance and servility in the laity, in both superstition, bigotry, and persecution." Ethan Allen, right, was also one of our founding fathers. And they write about Ethan Allen. "He was captured at Fort Ticonderoga while commanding the Green Mountain Boys, which helped inspire the country to pursue the War of Independence. That Jesus Christ was not God is evident from his own words. Allen also wrote that he was generally denominated a deist, the reality of which I never disputed, being conscious that I am no Christian. Allen stopped his own wedding ceremony when the judge asked if he promised to live with Fanny Buchanan agreeable to the laws of God. Allen refused to answer until the judge agreed that the God referred to was the God of nature and the laws, those written in the great book of nature." Truly a Unitarian in that context. Benjamin Franklin also espoused Unitarian values, also a flawed human being, as we know from so much of history, in terms of some of his arrogance and his, meanderings in his marriage and things of that nature. And they state here that he was the delegate to the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention. And he is quoted as saying, "As to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think the system of morals and his religion has received various corruption changes, and I have, with most of the present dissenters in England, some doubts as to his divinity, though it is a question I do not dogmatize upon, having never studied it, and think it needless to busy myself with it now, when I expect soon an opportunity of knowing the truth with less trouble." He died a month later, a deist, not a Christian. So this 1995 article, right now, think about this in the context of time. 1995, this is in the middle of Bill Clinton's presidency. And obviously we see this, we know as we look back historically, right, that this was truly a reflection of the rise of evangelical Christianity within the context of government and influencing legislation and things of this nature, and why there were concerns that people were espousing that this was a Christian nation. You look at people like Sarah Palin. Now, again, we can say a lot about Sarah Palin, but she was an influential person, and she still very strongly believes that this was a Christian nation and that we were founded on Christian values. So clearly there's a lot of debate, and that's where some of the divide comes into play. If you think about some of the words of Barry Goldwater, right? Again, like or not like Barry Goldwater as a conservative, one of the things that he was a true conservative in the sense that he wanted government not involved in our lives. He wanted government to take two giant steps back, to not play a role in what goes on in our bedroom, which goes on, in the halls of marriage, what goes on in terms of, abortion rights and things like that. He truly and firmly believed the government didn't have the right to be interfering in these levels of issues. And he warned us about the rise of evangelicalism and what impact this would have in the way that we navigated things in our Congress and in our in our government dealings, in terms of the legislation that gets pushed. And we know this, right? As we've seen the last few years, where this erosion of so many of these civil liberties that we have fought so hard for, suddenly we now see them being collapsed again, in the name of conservatism. But it's really social conservatism, not political conservatism. And I want to make sure that we understand that there is a difference between the two. That political conservatism is about small government, and government taking a giant step back from interfering in people's lives, daily lives, sort of that live and let live notion, right? That we can live the life that we want to lead and not have somebody tell us what to do. And then versus the social conservatism, which is about aligning the United States with conservative religious values that not everybody in this country espouse. So how do we get ourselves back to this idea of who we are as a founding as our founding values, and how do we espouse and promote the values of our founding fathers, which historically we know were Unitarian values from what we were just reading and talking about. Now, again, we have to be really careful because our founding fathers had flaws. They made mistakes. John Adams was known to be very arrogant and not a very social individual. He was roundly disliked by many, and felt very frustrated as president and vice president of our United States. He served only one term, if I recall correctly. Thomas Jefferson, as we've already talked about, and his role in keeping slaves and raping young women. And also, Benjamin Franklin with his philandering and having mistresses and living abroad. And ultimately, he ended up living much of his older years in France, um, uh, partly obviously as a diplomat, but also, you know, escaping some of the constraints that may have existed here in this country because of some of the things that he did or the values that he espoused. We're not expecting things to be perfect. And what I liked about what Thomas Jefferson said is that we're trying to make us a more perfect union. We're trying to make our country better, not to have, not and to not be thinking of us. I think of it in this way, that we're not static, that we're constantly trying to grow and improve ourselves, and to not necessarily say, well, nope, there's only one way of thinking about things. It's the way they thought about it 300 years ago, and therefore we there's no room for us to change and to grow and to evolve and to think about our worlds very differently. So I want to talk a little bit about Amanda Gorman's poem. Again, profound for me, when I think about this alignment between UU values, our founding fathers' values, and this poem that she says on a very profound day where only a week prior we may have lost, the democracy, this fragile democracy that that we have, worked hard to maintain for the last 200 and almost 50 years, 250 years coming up. So we'll start with some of the things that I read in the poem, and I loved in the very first part of that poem where she talks about, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. And I like the play on words and the rhythms of that. And again, think about who we are as Unitarian Universalists. We talk about this idea of justice and equity and fairness. And we see this obviously with the issues around Black Lives Movements and the equity, the racial disparities and among brown people and indigenous people versus white, what is just for the LGBT community, et cetera, et cetera. What is just for women who are looking to have body autonomy and find themselves more likely to be victims of rape and sexual harassment and needing to sometimes have an abortion that is now, they're attempting to criminalize. And while we keep pushing back and fighting back against that, what we know across the planet is when we have safe and legal abortions, Abortions go down, they don't go up. All these are challenging topics, of course, as humans. But Amanda Gorman's poem talks about how important it is for us to find justice, and that right now we think so many things are just, or historically we've behaved in ways that we think were just, but in the end we're not very just. They were not examples of justice. If you think about Rawls' work on what is a just society, it's when you stand behind, to keep it as simple as possible, when you stand behind the veil of ignorance and you're faced with a decision, you don't know if that decision is going to affect you, right? You don't know that. That's part of that veil of ignorance. I don't know how this is going to affect me or others. So would I make the same decision, right, if I knew this was going to affect me, right? Or what would I advocate for myself should be that which I advocate for my community. And my goal, as Rawls would argue, is to lift up, to create a level playing field for those who don't have the same advantages. I mean, the goal of justice theories and the goal of having a just society is to create that level playing field so there's opportunity for all to achieve. So it is important that we think about, what we have historically thought to be just is not just. And again, that's part of that goal of finding the more perfect union. We learn, we grow, and as Maya Angelou says, right, when you know better, you do better. So we have to always be open to this idea of learning, growing as a people, that to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes and to learn and to not repeat those mistakes. That's our goal, right? So as I work through now this idea of other things in her poem, a few more stanzas down, she writes, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. And as I've already referenced a few times, our Declaration of Independence is about creating a more perfect union. These are the words of Thomas Jefferson, that it's not going to be perfect. It is an evolving, growing thing where we're going to step in steaming piles of dog poop and we're going to make mistakes and we're going to have to scrape that poop off of our shoes and continue to learn and grow and stretch. And this is where I think where we're at. We've hit sort of a bottom that's pretty ugly. And all of these issues, right? Donald Trump didn't create them, but he put a highlight in them and he enabled them, these values, these voices, right, to speak up, white supremacy and things of this nature, allowing them to have a voice, a legitimate voice in the society that really should not be tolerating these things at all. So the fact that we are more perfect, to me, implies that we are trying to achieve, to approach an improvement over time, like like calculus, right? You never quite get there, but you can approach it as close as you can. We'll never be perfect. We shouldn't be perfect. There is no perfect, because perfect is an enemy of excellence. And I think that our goal is to continue to approach it, to continue to work to improve, to be better, to be that much closer to it. And I think perfection becomes a moving target as we learn and we grow and society evolves and we learn about technology and we learn about the next great invention that happens and what implications that has for us in our society. Moving on with some of the other points in that continuing stanza, where she says that, to form a union that is perfect, she says we are striving to forge our union with purpose. And I think that's the goal, right? The purpose of us. Think about our values as Unitarians, our values as this country. We're trying to forge our union with purpose and mindfulness and conscientiousness to approach improvement as much as we can. And it talks about sort of this interdependent web of people, right? To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And addressing that even with all of our differences, right, that we are committed to all of these people. And that's such an alignment with who we are as Unitarians. She goes on later, in a few lines down, We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. This idea of a world community where there are going to be some significant differences in the way that we see the world. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. Community, connection. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true, that even as we grieved, we grew, we hurt, we hoped, we tried, we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together victorious. This is the idea of world peace and interdependence. Not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Again, the importance of our connection and our interdependent web that we live in, right? We have to be reaching up to help all, even people that we disagree with, figuring out how to find common ground if that's possible. Again, a few more stanzas down, she talks about, we will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. Again, this interdependent web, that what we do has reverberations for generations to come. And if we think back to Native American culture and how they talk about what we do, every decision that we make, we have to think about what impact that's going to have for 7 generations. You know, will it hurt people 7 years down the line? Right. And if I think about, you know, in my business teachings, right, I think about decisions that we've made as, you know, businesses have made over time. GE comes to mind. They were a very big employer in the Northeast where I grew up and spent my summers in the Hudson Valley. And GE was known for putting PCBs in the river. And you know, if they had taken the consideration of, is putting these horrible chemicals in water, you know, what impact is it going to have 7 generations down the line? You know, if they had done that with the right intentions and the mindfulness about wanting to make the right decision, would they have necessarily done that? You know, I would like to think that they wouldn't have. But in the moment, people are thinking about short-term profits and short-term goals, and no one cared about the long-term implications. This is a challenge that we have here in the United States. We tend to have a very short-term point of view. And I know when I was in my MBA program and in my doctoral program, we spent a lot of time talking about the quarteritis that tends to pervade investors, that this quarter I need more money, this quarter I need more money, and this quarter I better see my return on investment or I'm going to dump this stock and move on to the next thing. Look at what's happening with GameStop and all sorts of things, right? All the manipulations that are going on either side. Again, say what you want about the whole process, but what it's reflecting and what it's putting a spotlight on is that if we're only thinking about short-term investment issues, whether it's investing in our country, investing in our planet, investing in people, and not thinking about the long-term implications of things. If we're only investing short-term, we're not going to be considering what our implications are for the burdens that we leave for our children behind us. And it is selfish for us to say, well, you know, I'll just let my children deal with that. Oh no, just because it doesn't affect you now, we are stewards, right, of this planet. We are stewards of the life that lives on it. The fact that we're living in a pandemic, again, is also an important reminder that we have failed our stewardship as a people, not necessarily individuals of us, but as a people, we have failed in our stewardship of this planet. And that's a scary thing, you know, and that's a fundamental part of Genesis, right? If you think about, you know, the Bible, and if you have read the Bible and the Genesis story, right, that God gave man domain, you know, over the planet and over nature. So if you really truly follow the Bible, why would you engage in these short-term behaviors, knowing that we have a responsibility to care for the animals, care for people, to behave humanely in the way that we invest in, you know, our planet, people, and businesses and things of that nature. So, yes, it is important that we recognize that these are burdens that we've created. I like how she continues to go on and talk about, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So Yes, we have might, but we need to have might with mercy, balance. We need to have might with right, right? So we can be strong, but we need to also, make sure that we are doing the right thing as we need to, right? And, our theme for January is balance, right? Then love becomes our legacy and change is the birthright. So things we know are going to change. There's just no getting around that. Life changes, times change. As I've already said several times, we're looking for a more perfect union that will continue to evolve and change over time. It's not a static thing, that we are continually learning, growing, stretching, being better people as we can. And when you know better, you do better. She concludes the poem with I think the phrasing that was the most powerful for most of us that listened to this, about being the light. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And this is kind of what it comes down to for me. We are the light. We have a unique place as Unitarian Universalists. The influence that we've had in the founding fathers' values of what this country was built on. And Amanda Gorman's poem embraces that in a beautiful way of illustrating, what this country means to many people and how important it is for us to be that light, to be that role model, to be that beacon, to inspire love and to seek justice. So we saw these themes of all of our UU principles throughout this. And if we think even about that eighth principle, that is, it is still under debate, is still being considered in terms of justice and equity, racial justice, racial equity. That's also a very integral part of what we stand for, what our values are. And I think it is really essential that we embrace Amanda Gorman's work and think about every day, how do we as a beloved community learn from our pasts, learn from our histories. Even as Unitarians, we have a struggle with racial equity and racial issues historically. If you've done some studies on this and you've read this, how do we then take this and learn from those mistakes and continue to grow? And how do we give grace to those who are learning, who have recognized that they've made mistakes and are willing to learn and to grow, right? We offer grace to those who want to grow and to improve, and we need to do that for ourselves. So I welcome all of you to, embody Amanda Gorman, to think about what those values are, how those values are reflected in our flawed and wonderful and insightful founding fathers, that we can learn how to forgive their flaws, but embrace the goodness that they brought to the table, the intentions and the good actions that they brought to the table. Because remember, it's about balance, it's intentions and actions too. And how we can help us to grow better as a society, as a faith tradition, as people, as friends, learning to make those connections to each other. Thank you, and blessed be. Our announcements for today are as follows. Number one, please check your church this week, our newsletter for February, as well as the UU Friends postings on Facebook regarding a wonderful opportunity we have to engage in further understanding the sources of our UU faith tradition. The UU seminarians from Eden Seminary have invited us to participate in a multi-part series discussing the sources of our UU faith, Judaism, humanism, Christianity, etc. This series will go from February through May, and every couple of weeks they have a session set up. So please join, please sign up, support our fellow congregants who are members of those seminarians, the seminarian group, and learn a little bit more about what it means to be a UU. Look for announcements in the next few weeks about our healing circles. Following this, we will be scheduling a session on how to handle difficult conversations that all congregants are welcome to join, as well as the healing circles. They're also welcome to join that as well. Our goal is to close out the year to ensure we have a right relationship covenant done before we return to our regular church year in fall 2021. So please participate, please look out for those messages, and please, I hope you will join us in the work that needs to be done. Please contact the church office if you have an event or an announcement that you would like us to share via our weekly Church This Week email. If you're interested in receiving our weekly email, please send your contact details to church@firstuualton.org. And remember to join us next week for our virtual services here on YouTube. Now, if you have a lit chalice or candle near you, I invite you to join me in extinguishing the chalice. The light of truth and meaning cannot be put out. We are keepers of this flame until we meet again. Our closing words are words that I've used before, but they seem particularly relevant to today's service. They are by Cheryl Block. As we go forward into this frightening, exhilarating, confusing, miraculous world, may we offer our comfort to the afflicted, our love to those who are lonely, and our wish for all to be safe. Amen, and blessed be. Please enjoy your day and the rest of your week. Thank you.